Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back. I recently did a painting and reading series where I read the entirety of Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka whilst showing you the process of a painting that I did inspired by it. Now, when I showed the process, I didn't narrate the process in any way, so I realised that for some people it might not be clear exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. In fact, probably for most people it won't be clear why I'm doing it, because I wasn't always clear at the time. But that being said, I'm going to show you the process now. Here's the painting. And yeah, I'm going to try and explain my best how I did it. I've made a shorter video of the process where I've sped bits up and chopped bits out, and we're going to watch it together now. Here we go. So I'm doing the outline in charcoal. I love charcoal. It's really nice to work with because you can smudge it about, you can get really nice big thick lines, and like that you can fill in huge areas at a time. Then I'm going over the outline in pen just to kind of bolden up where I actually want it and make sure it shows through the paint a little bit, because the charcoal won't show through very much. And filling in the background. You'll notice that this canvas isn't actually a clean canvas. That's not just because it's primed, it's actually a canvas that I started another painting on. I didn't finish that painting because I didn't like it, so instead I painted over it, but the paint that I used to paint over it, I used the wrong one by accident, so I had to do loads of layers to get it white again, which meant it ended up cracking slightly, but I still did this painting over it anyway because I kind of liked the cracking effect, and I figured that it would work for the kind of aesthetic that I was going for with this painting. Anyway, back to this. The point that we're at the moment is I've just got my sort of base colours on. It's quite rough at the moment. I like to sort of fill in the whole thing with vague approximations of the colours I'm going to use. Some people like to be a lot more precise and figure their colours out and get them straight on in little bits. If we were talking writing, I'd be a pantser, not a plotter. That's a NaNoWriMo reference, I don't know if... Yeah, anyway. But I like to go in, get my base colours on, and then work from there and figure out what I want instead of trying to get everything perfect first try, because I just feel like gives a painting chance to kind of evolve in a natural way, and also you get a lot of marks and kind of tones and depth to it that you might not get if you just went in and did it straight away. It's totally a stylistic choice. I'm going in and lightening some bits up. I will say, when I lighten bits up like that, I usually leave the painting to dry a little bit first. I don't go straight on with the light colours, but I don't usually leave it too long either. I get it when it's kind of not wet but not completely dry, because then you can blend it a little bit at the edges, but it's not sort of horrible and muddy to work with. I work with acrylics, by the way, for context for that. Obviously with oils you'd be working with a very different time frame if you did stuff like that. And again, that's another thing why some people like to get their colours right straight away. If you're working with oils, obviously you don't want to be doing layer upon layer upon layer, because then your painting is going to take months. But acrylics, it's lovely. Leave it half an hour, it's bone dry, you know. So yeah, I'm going in, adding way more highlights, adding a little bit of colour. Really keen on getting a lot of green shades. I wanted a very sort of sickly green, like a very yellow green, something that suggested kind of unwellness, but then also because you've got the brown as well, because it is like the character is referred to as like a big brown bug, so I didn't want to make him entirely green, and the sickly yellow green and the brown together suggested this kind of goldness to me that I ended up really leaning into quite heavily, because I thought as well it made a nice juxtaposition of he's kind of this character that's in the throes of despair, but talking about his family leading this sort of not well off life, but they're definitely better off than they acknowledge. There's an element of luxury there, like his sister spends a lot of time just playing the violin and stuff, and so I really wanted to reflect that weird juxtaposition of this character in total despair with these sort of luxurious golden colours and everything, but also fading into the sort of sickly green hues to kind of show that unwellness to it. The spots and everything that I've done, it says in the story that he looks down and he sees white spots all over his belly. I wanted to include them all over him because I wasn't sure exactly what they were from reading the text, so I just assumed like his skin is blotchy. Again, it works well with the sort of unwell look. Now the eyes, you can see I'm doing the eyes here, they start off as these sort of blue shiny eyes. They don't end up that way, they go through a few different iterations before they're done. Refilling his leg in here because it kind of got a bit lost, and just going over the legs as well. Sometimes when I'm painting I like to kind of do big chunks and some bits get lost and just add them in again later, but I like to start from a very pale base colour to really make the colours that I put on top pop. And you'll notice what I did with those flowers there. I love adding flowers to paintings. I just think, like, especially going off flower language and everything, I use, I think it's called something like the Gardener's Almanac or whatever, and it's got a load of flower meanings in it, and I love including stuff like that in paintings. But yeah, so what I'm doing is I've done the outlines in chalk just to show myself where the flowers are, then gone over that in white to give myself that pale base coat that I was talking about, and then filling in my base colours as well. So we've got the hyacinths in the background, they're sort of purpley blue, and then the marigolds are yellow, and then the candy tufts, I think they're called, white, although those are going to get redone several times because I did them really big and then realised if they're really big that means they're really close up, and he's not really close up, and that implied a kind of distance between them and him that I didn't want, because I wanted the painting to be kind of very squished, very claustrophobic, so I wanted that bush a lot closer to him, so I ended up having to actually go in, you'll see soon, and totally redo that to have much smaller flowers, because candy tuft flowers are quite small. So obviously if it's at a similar distance to what he is, they need to be tiny. So yeah, all the detail that I'm doing on those you can pretty much ignore because it had to be totally redone. But the marigolds, they were really fun to do. You can see me putting some detail on them. I'm sort of getting in the shadows and pops of red that I really want on there, and then I'm going in with the pencil and just outlining stuff to help myself figure out where the shapes are, because I know that I'm going to be putting a lot more layers on there, so it's kind of fair enough using the pencil. I'm not worried about having those marks in the final painting because I know they're going to get covered up. Adding some foliage as well, then going through and using the white just to lighten everything up so that when I put my next layers on they're going to really pop. Because with yellow, especially, yellow is a very translucent colour, so if you, well, with most paints anyway, if you can find a lovely thick yellow acrylic that isn't very translucent, please do let me know in the comments, because I would love to get some. But also, if it's at all expensive, you can let me know in the comments. I'm not going to buy it. Unless someone, like, a bunch of you want to go subscribe to my Patreon and give me more money for buying paints with. But yeah, translucent yellow, you need a very pale backdrop if you want yellow to pop, which means sometimes going over with a few coats of white first before you put your yellow on if you've already got something else going on there already. So yeah, I start putting the foliage on where the candy tufts are, but you'll see in a minute it's where I realise the mistake I've made with the kind of perspective of the bush being too close, and then you'll see I've not got to it yet somehow, but I do cover the whole thing in green again in a minute. But it's quite nice because the flowers that I got on there to start with do add some nice shapes and stuff to the bush, which is good at least. And the marigolds are really coming along. I'm sort of adding a lot of detail to the foliage. I like to switch between doing the foliage and the flowers when I'm doing plants like that, and do them all together, not do one then the other, because I think they inform each other a lot in terms of where your shadows want to be and everything. So if you kind of, if for instance you did all your foliage first and then your flowers, and then you decide to change the shape of some of the flowers, your shadows on the foliage are going to be wrong. So I think it works to kind of work on them in tandem, like do a bit of one, do a bit of the other, do a bit of one. And that works as well because obviously while certain bits are drying, you've got something else to be working on, which is an approach that I take a lot with my paintings. You'll see I'm sort of flicking about from one area to another, and a lot of the reason for that is partly so that it comes together as a cohesive whole, so that, you know, as I'm working on it, each bit is informing the other bits, but then also because it's just efficient, so I don't have to put it aside while I wait for it to dry. I can just work on a different part of the painting. I'm getting a lot of detail on his face now. I wanted this kind of almost translucent effect where the pincer is kind of bursting its way out of his cheek. I wanted it to seem like the pincer was kind of formed under his cheek, and then it's just starting to burst its way out. Because how I have the painting, I wanted it to be kind of as he is changing into this monstrous being. There are a few details that kind of move away from that later in the painting, because they're just too integral to the story to not include. But yeah, I really wanted this image of the event, as it were, that kicks the story off. But then, yeah, there's other details from other parts of the story that kind of lends to... Sorry, I'm just getting my coffee. That kind of lends to it creating a kind of summary of the story, if that makes sense. I don't like to do things too literally at any point when it comes to painting. I mean, usually I make very surrealist pieces. I like to do things from a sort of dreamlike perspective, where it's like, oh, this makes me think of this, which is connected to that, and that's connected to this, so they're all gonna go in the painting. You can see I'm adding the faces now. These faces are actually supposed to be... The main character's called Gregor, so that's Bugman. These faces are supposed to be at the top his father, at the bottom his mother, and in the middle his sister. And so I tried to reflect that on their faces. So his father is quite a stern, dour sort of character. His mother's very, very sad and anxious and worried all the time. And his sister is an interesting character because she sort of starts off very kind and sympathetic. I'm spoiling this story so much. Go watch the reading first, right? That's my excuse for the amount of spoilers in this, is that I've already done the reading, so go watch that first. But yeah, his sister starts off very kind and sympathetic, but then she's actually really not very nice by the end of the story. And the sort of running part of her character that stays stable is she's very dramatic. She's very sort of like, oh my gosh, drama time. So she's the one who's sort of crying out, and obviously she looks a bit younger than the other two faces as well, and that's very pertinent to the story, is kind of her youth and everything, because she's used as almost like a mirror to Gregor at the end of the story, because the story ends by focusing on her parents thinking about marrying her off, essentially, and talking about what a strong, beautiful young woman she's grown into. It's a really good story. If you've not read it or listened to the reading video, you should do, because it's really worth a read. It's got a lot of good commentary about how we think about bodies and what bodies are to us. Anyway, the painting, I'm going back in and doing more on the marigolds now. You can see I've gone over in white again to lighten it up again, because I think I just got a few bits that were not popping the way that I wanted to, the way that I wanted them to, and they were a bit darker than I wanted them to be. So yeah, lightened it up again, going in again, and you can see the colours are much kind of neater and tidier this time. And then, oh god, the candy tufts. Thank god for being able to change the speed of videos, that's all I'll say, because I cannot tell you how long that actually took. It took so long. Yeah, painting each of those little flowers meticulously. Just, yeah, they've all got their own little petals and everything, their own shapes. It took an age, and it's not done yet at this point, which is saying something. But yeah, there needs to be kind of shadows and everything, and I could have left them like that, but it wouldn't have looked quite as real as the rest of it, so I do go back in with them later. Then I'm doing the antennae. For his antennae and his legs, actually, I wanted this kind of soft fluffiness to them. So what I'm doing with the antennae is just being very messy, going in with the white, letting it kind of go where it wants, just because I really wanted to use the shape of the brush to really get those sort of feathery strokes. But when you're using the brush in that way, it's not always the most accurate, so I do just go in with the black afterwards and just tidy it up a little bit. And again, that's one of those where I put a lighter coat on to start with, and then I'll go in with the colour afterwards. Going in on his shell and adding some shadows and highlights just to get a bit more depth and shaping to that, because it was looking a bit flat. And yeah, adding some shadows around the edges of the flowers. I am adding more shadows, you'll notice, at the corners. This is to create a sort of faux vignette, as it were. So like a vignette where the picture is dark around the edges. I really like that effect, and especially for something where it's supposed to have that sort of old-timey look, because it's quite an old story, and that hint of sort of vintage luxury. I think a vignette is essential there, which is why I was very careful to put my shadows deeper around the corners of the flowers, just to suggest that sort of slope of shadow going round the image. Yeah, you can see I'm getting some colour onto the antennae now. Going in, neatening up a bit. You'll see me do this a bunch of times throughout the video, just going in with the black and going round the edges of stuff that's got a bit messy. That's one of the nice things about working with a painting like this, where the background is one solid colour, because you can just go in and correct when you go over the edges, which is so nice. It's a lot more difficult if you're working on something with a very complicated background. But yeah, I didn't really want a complicated background for this, because I wanted all the focus to be on what's going on, you know, the subject and this sort of decoration around him that helps to tell the story. And I didn't really think it needed a background. I thought that would take away from it. But yeah, I did kind of do myself a favour with that line of thinking as well. You can see I'm getting the oh, I like that little shadow there. You can see I'm getting a hairiness to the legs by just going in and adding just little highlights and shadows that sort of suggest little fibres coming up. What you want to make sure is that for every highlight, if you're getting a sort of spiky hairy look, for every highlight you want a corresponding shadow as well. Otherwise it's I mean, you don't have to, you can just have shadows or just have highlights, but if you have a highlight with a corresponding shadow, then you get depth, which is what you really want if you want something to look fluffy. because the fluffiness comes from that kind of depth. Again, you see me going on the corners of the flowers as well, getting more, leaning more into that sort of vignette look. I did go up the middles of the legs as well and make them a bit darker, just to kind of accentuate that the edges of the legs were lighter, because you'll notice if you look at something hairy in the light, it's, you know, you've got the solid bit in the middle and then the hairs coming off, and where the hairs are coming off, the light shines through. So much of painting is just staring at random objects in your life and thinking, this is an interesting thing about this thing's texture, or how the light interacts with this thing, and just mentally storing that for later. Unless you do nice things like still lifes where you can just look at it and then paint it. But yeah, if you paint things from your imagination, a lot of your life will be spent staring at things for far too much time, thinking about how the light interplays with them. Yeah, because I've added all the shadows around the flowers, I'm going into the candy tufts now and adding some highlights just to make the actual flowers themselves pop out a little bit. I think that looks really exciting, makes it look a bit almost sparkly. And that's another thing, like what I just said about spending a lot of time observing how the light interplays with things. Yes, you can do that, and yes, you can go for a totally accurate look, but also it's very fun to make light play with things in unexpected ways in your paintings, because realism is fun, but if you can sort of shine a light on something with your paint in a way that makes it more exciting but isn't realistic, I'd say just go for it, because it's nice to look at things that look interesting, and I'd rather look at something that looks interesting than something that looks 100% realistic, especially in an image like this, or like a lot of the paintings that I do that are quite surreal, because it's like, it's never going to look realistic anyway, is it? It's weird. Nearly said a weird word there. It's very weird. So yeah, why not have some not 100% real but very pretty lighting on the flowers, you know what I mean? You can see with the eyes, this is what I was mentioning earlier, how the eyes get totally redesigned. I really didn't like the sort of crackly egg looking effect that I had on them to start with. I thought it just didn't quite work. It was a bit too boring almost. So I went for more of like a very small granular like fly eye sort of thing, just using lots and lots of different coloured dots. I used quite a few different colours in there as well, because I spent a little bit of time looking at zoomed in pictures of flies' eyes and noticed that there's like a lot of very vibrant colours you can find in there, and I couldn't decide on just one to use, and also some of them have a lot of colours in the same image, so I was just like, yeah, orange, red, green, purple, they can all live on there. And it gets a bit muddy when I put the shadows on, but I am going to go in and add some more interesting sort of pinks and everything over the top, just to make it pop over the top of those shadows like it's got little sparkles in it. Now I'm cleaning up the shell. The inside of the shell, the reason it's got a sort of pink hue as well as being brownish is because I wanted it to look a little bit fleshy, if that makes sense. So even though obviously he's like Mr. Bugman, I wanted to really emphasize this, like, he is turning into Mr. Bugman. So yeah, I wanted that kind of gross, looks like his insides sort of colour without being gory. If I'd have wanted it to be gory, I would have gone for a much more red tone, but because I just wanted a hint of it, I just added a little bit of pink to the brown. Don't make any jokes about that. Now I'm going over the marigolds and sort of highlighting the edges again, really making them shine. I did actually add some gold paint to the edges of them as well, so when you see the painting in person, it's got a lovely... I'll see if I can get it to do it on the camera. Oh, it's hard to see on the camera, but you might be able to see a little bit. You can see they sort of shine, which is really nice. And that's not the only area where I added some metallics. There are a few areas where I added metallics just to really lean into that kind of, like, making it look luxurious sort of feeling. Adding some more shadows to the shell, and again the shell is one of the areas that has a little bit of metallic paint on it as well. It's got a little bit of gold there. You know how I was talking about the gold tones earlier? Like, it literally has like metallic gold paint on there as well, which is really fun. Really going in and trying to get the face perfect, because obviously if you're doing a painting where the subject of your painting has a face, you generally, unless the point is that the face is ambiguous, which is fun, and actually I really want to do a painting like that now, but yeah, generally, if your subject has a face, the face wants to be absolutely the best you can make it, because it's the first place that someone's eyes will get drawn. We're hardwired to do that. Literally, human brains are programmed to look for faces in things. So, if the subject of your painting has a face, yeah, spend so much time on it, it'll be worth it. Even if there's bits of the rest of the painting that are a bit crap, yeah, that is where people's eyes are going to go first, and just do it. Talking of faces, going through, and you won't see any drastic changes on these from this point, because the basic shapes of them I'm happy with, but I do just go through quite a few times throughout the course of the painting and just deepen up shadows, lighten up highlights. This is because sometimes when you're painting, you can have something look a certain way while the paint is wet, and then it dries, and your light colours lose a bit of their brightness as they dry when you're working with acrylics, especially when you're working with cheap acrylics, which is what I work with. This is just from the paint being a little bit translucent. You know, it dries and it doesn't show through quite as well. So what you want to do is just slap another layer on, just where you remember it being brighter and sort of more vibrant or having more contrast. Just go in, redo it, do it a little bit exaggerated but not loads, and then it'll dry how you want it. Now, this in the corner here, this is supposed to be the painting that Gregor has on his wall that he's really fond of. It's actually a cutout picture from a magazine. He cut it out and put it in a beautiful ornate frame, and it's pretty much, from what I can gather, the only sort of decor in his bedroom. Like, there's furniture, and then apart from that, the only touch of him in his room is this picture, and he's sort of fiercely protective over it in the story, so I figured that had to go in the painting. At first I wasn't sure where to put it, and then I realised, oh, where better to put it than in the corner, like a postage stamp, because that just looks cool, and it adds to the sort of old-timey kind of vintage aesthetic that we've also got going on with the picture as well, having like this little picture like a little postage stamp. So I'm really happy with that. And that's another one where I've used metallics as well on the frame to make it look like it's gilded ornate frame, and I actually did them really, really thick as well, partly because I am lazy and they were very little lines, so I could just do them really thick, and it saved me from doing a lot of work with shadows and highlights because the light in the room does it for me. Now you can see in the painting I'm going in and doing this apple. In the story, later on in the story, he's got an apple in him that's stuck in him, it's been thrown at him, and it's rotting away, which is why the colours on the apple that I'm doing are very muted. Partly so that they blend into the image, and we're sort of working in the same colour palette, partly because in the story it is actually rotting away in his flesh. It's quite horrible, really. You can see I'm going around and doing the red around the outside and adding some sort of reds and yellows around it, like it's swollen, like there's maybe pus under there, like it's infected. I really wanted it to have that sort of gross, slimy, ooh, that doesn't look quite right, you know. That's an interesting thing as well. That's one of the parts of the painting that I was mentioning earlier that doesn't entirely make sense for a painting of him turning into Mr. Bugman, because it's obviously the apple is a lot later in the story, but it's such an important part of the story that it really felt necessary in what is essentially an illustration of the story as a whole. And I'm going in and working on the painting again. For this painting I actually did a lot of initial sketches first in my notebook, trying to get the style right. I sort of looked up the year that Metamorphosis was published and then had a snoot around some fashion magazines from that kind of era, and what I've done is perhaps a little bit after the time period that it was maybe set in, but I think it works better with the blacks and golds in the paintings. So it's near enough to the time period that the story is from, and it's very much like based on those kind of contemporary fashion illustrations. I had a lot of fun actually doing these sketches for that, and I'm really happy with how it came out, because one thing that happened that isn't entirely clear in this video is that when I glossed it, because I glossed the painting separately, I gave it its own layer of gloss before I varnished the whole painting, just to really add to that like feeling of it being in a picture frame. When I did that, some of the ink from where I drew the outline ran and made all the colours of it darker, and it actually made the picture look sort of old and damaged, and I really enjoy that. Like you can kind of see that in the finished one. It's got a very like vintagey sort of look to it, which I really like. You'll notice I don't go in and do the frame in metallic paint straight away. What I do first is I add a base layer, like I have done with a lot of areas. The reason I use green is just because I think green really helps gold to pop, and I think gold sits over green quite nicely. Green really works with a lot of metallics. It's kind of like, you know, if you've got any gaps in your paint, it's not going to look unnatural. It just looks like kind of oxidization, which I know that gold doesn't oxidize, but I don't think frame would be literally gold. I think it would be like gold coloured. And also, what's really nice is it's actually left this little green kind of outline around it that looks a bit like sort of backing that you would have in the frame, like it's not cut out exactly evenly, which I like because I know that he cut it out himself and put it in this fancy frame, so I didn't want it to look perfect, and I think that's worked really well. I'm going in and doing more highlights on the eyes because they were not sparkly enough for my taste. I wanted them to be really, really sparkly, and they weren't sparkly enough. The eyes are another area where I have actually used some metallic paints as well. There's some metallic silver in there, and there's some neon pink, which is one of my favourite paints to use, is like neon pink. I don't buy a lot of pre-mixed colours. I mix a lot of my own colours from like basic primaries, but I will happily buy tubes of neon pink because it's such a nice colour and you just can't really make it yourself, you know, from your primaries. I mean, you can add white to red to get pink, but you won't get neon pink. I'm adding some metallic silver on the hyacinths as well, just to give them that nice sort of wet shine like flowers have sometimes, that sort of dewiness. And like I said, I'm adding some of the gold metallic to the shell as well. So there's quite a few metallics going on throughout the image, and it makes it really nice when the light hits it in different ways. Hard to see here because of the light I've got, but you can see it on the eyes. Very cool. And I'm going through round rather and doing my edges as well. I've just done my edges in solid black. I think it frames the image quite nicely. I like doing my edges in solid black. I just think it looks neat. And then I used a matte varnish over it, which you wouldn't think because it is very shiny, but I used a very thick layer of matte varnish because it is quite textured, and also with the cracking that I mentioned at the start, you know, that sort of cracked texture, I wanted to make sure I had a lot of varnish on there because I was a little bit worried about bits of it flaking off, and so I wanted that varnish on there partly just to hold it together. And there you go, that's the image done. I'm really pleased with how it came out. There were 9 parts before I released the full reading video. Each part was 15 minutes reading, but sped up painting, usually about 2 hours of painting went into it, so it's around 18 hours, not including drying time. Right, I hope you have either learned something or been inspired to make something of your own or try a different technique. It's been really fun. If you enjoyed this, subscribe, like the video, join my Patreon if you really liked it, and I'll see you next time. Take care.